Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Heather Douglas, and I'm here from Carleton University, along with Tracy, who will be speaking shortly after me. And I just want to say again how honored we are to be here and to have been able to listen, Linda, to your wonderful, wow, history. I'm kind of overwhelmed by all the wonderful things you've done, and just to be able to help celebrate with you. So thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this day. So what Tracy and I are going to be talking about, I'm going to start out, I'm going to talk a little bit about an early numeracy screener that we have developed at Carleton University that's being used in the province of Alberta and elsewhere in the country. And then Tracy is going to follow up by talking a bit about how she has been able to use the screener to help inform an understanding of her students' mathematical learning and to foster their development. So first, though, I think we should just look at, I'm going to stand over here so I'm not in front of the screen. I think we should just look at exactly what we mean by screener, because I hear different definitions bandied about when I talk to people about screeners. This definition is from the Right to Read report, and essentially a screener is something that's relatively brief. It's evidence-based, and the idea is that it's supposed to provide educators with information about potential learning difficulties that students may be experiencing. And the goal is to be able to identify those students who are either currently experiencing difficulties with math or maybe experiencing difficulties down the road. And importantly, why you want to do that is that so that you can either intervene through classroom instruction or intervene through intervention to help and support these students' early learning. And I like to think, when you were talking, Lyndon, you were talking about how do we know if things are working if we're not seeing where they're at. I think that's one of the advantages of using a screener is you can identify pre-post if you're doing some work with children to see if you're having an impact. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history as to where this screener came from. So back in spring 2021, about a year into COVID, Joanne received a phone call from Alberta Education, and they were really concerned about what was happening with their students' numeracy skills. A year on, kids hadn't been attending school, there'd been mixed schooling. So they really wanted to be able to identify where the kids are at with their numeracy skills. And when I say early numeracy, I should say this is for K to 3. I should have put that in there earlier. But they wanted to see where their kids were at, and they were actually putting some money behind children who were identified as struggling to help provide supports for those children. So they approached us because of Joanne's expertise in math cognition. And we spent a fair bit of time looking at the literature, looking at some of the measures that we've been using as we're doing our math cognition research. And we put together a test battery to be used in the Alberta School Board. And in that 2021-22 school year, the test was rolled out to students in grades 2 and 3, wrote the test in the fall. And then in the winter, they brought in the kinders and the grade 1s to write the test. And they tested kids 3 times a year. So we got a bit of feedback, and we got some data back from that testing that allowed us to dig a little deeper into the assessment, do some refining of the assessment, test and ensure that the items were reliable in the assessment. And in the 2022-23, last year, basically, we extended the assessment to grade 4 at the request of Alberta Education. And we also started some partnerships so that we could do a little bit more research with the screener. Particularly, our first partnership is with the Fort Vermilion School District, where Julie and Helen were also doing some work with Julie's NIC 5. And Julie was talking about that training that they were doing and evaluating that. So we did some work with that's okay, thanks. With that, and then more recently, as of last year, we've now got some funding for, well, I guess it wasn't last year, it's the beginning of this year, we got some funding for the AIM initiative, the AIM collective, which Joanne is going to talk about. That's kind of the big story of where we're at with this. Now I'm going to dig a little deeper and tell you a little bit about what we were doing when we were developing the screener. So when again, we're pulling on the research from literature because literacy screening is something that is more readily recognized. There's been a lot more work done on it. So when we were developing the screener, there are a few things we wanted to consider. So first, we wanted to make sure, we wanted to see what scope of assessment we were going to include. We wanted to make sure that we were tapping into children's developing knowledge of number skills. We wanted to see that we could tap into some procedural, some conceptual. We wanted a variety of assessments. We wanted to make sure that the scores were going to be valid. We wanted to make sure that everything was supported by research. So we had a theoretical framework that these assessments were built on. And then from an empirical standpoint, with some of the research we've done, we've been able to validate the assessment with other measures. We wanted to make sure the scores were reliable, so getting some of that data back, we were able to do that. Also, I think one of the things that's interesting here is there's a lot of measurement tools out there, but there aren't a lot of Canadian-centric ones. So this is our population of interest, is Canadian children. And part of having something for Canadian children, we wanted that is inclusive, so there's not a huge language element, because we're not assessing children's reading skills, we're assessing their math skills. So we wanted to distinguish that. So English language learners, French language learners could use it. And in our first year with Alberta, we were able to get some data back on about 50,000 kids. So we were able to get some really good guidelines, what they would call cut scores or risk levels for a representative sample of the province. And finally, we had to consider how we wanted it administered. And we started off with pencil paper. That's what we're doing. It's full class in the older grades, but with kinders, well, you heard about how challenging it is assessing kinders and working with kinders. You really need to be doing it one-on-one. So that's kind of all the things that went into our minds as we're thinking about how to, what this assessment's going to look like. So when we're talking, and we wanted to make sure that actually we were identifying kids that were at risk, which Tracy will talk a little bit about how she's been able to do that. But when we're thinking about tapping into those early numeracy skills, we have to really figure out, okay, what are those skills that are critical? What is the research telling us that children need to know? And the foundational math skills, well, you guys are math people, you know, it's pretty hierarchical. We're constantly building on earlier skills. So sort of at the most basic level, we're talking about number skills, children's understanding of numbers and how they're represented, how numbers are related to each other, and how we can operate on numbers. At least this is like thinking specifically of whole numbers. And although it is hierarchical, there's a bit of back and forth. It's almost more like overlapping waves. You're kind of going forward, that's you're learning more about number relations, it's reinforcing your understanding of numbers, you're learning more about operations. Back and forth it goes. So we looked at these 3 subdomains of math knowledge. And what's really important, we wanted to get measures from each of these subdomains. Why? Because skills in each of these, although they're all related to each other, they are uniquely predictive of later mathematics. So we needed to think about capturing skills over these, and we also needed to think about continuity, because we were looking at assessing kids from kindergarten to grade 3. So some of these assessments we might want to do in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, so we can again really tap into student growth. And as I said, each skill is unique, but predicts a unique part of the puzzle that talks about learning math. So numbers. So in numbers, you heard about counting, you heard about how important cardinality is. Well, we do have counting assessments. We have assessments where the child is enumerating sets, because counting and cardinality in kindergarten are predictive of students' math skills in grade 5. So back to Linda, this early math really matters. And back to that big chart that Helen put up with all those lines where it shows how those early math skills are predictive of later math skills. Number representations. Do children know that this is the number 5, is the word 5, and they can count that those are 5 items? Why? Understanding those number symbols is really critical for students in their transition to grade 1 and into understanding formal mathematics. And on the idea of, I've called this transcoding. So this is basically being able to say 5 is this, 5 is that. For older kids, when they're writing numbers, their understanding of place value is tapping into their understanding of the number system. So for instance, if a child is told to write 205, if the child writes 2005, we know that child doesn't have a really good handle on the number system in the hundreds. And I can't remember if it was you, Linda, or if it was you, Helen, that was talking about how error analysis in looking at children's counting and their number naming can really help identify some of the things some of children's thinking. So that's numbers, number relations. So we've got numbers on this level, then we're talking number relations. Numbers can be related by size. If we think of the numbers 1, 2, 3, 3 is bigger than 2. Numbers can be related by order. 1 precedes 2, 2 precedes 3, and they can be represented in space proportionally. So in our assessment, we have a magnitude assessment where children are just looking at pairs of numbers and crossing off the bigger number, which sounds really basic, and yet children's ability to quickly cross off the larger number is tapping in to their deeper knowledge of what that number is and what that number represents. And in a meta-analysis of over 45 studies, comparing numbers is predictive of later math skills. Similarly, number order. Children are looking at, and this is older children, not 3 numbers. Are they in increasing order? Their ability to look at those numbers and quickly recognize, are those numbers getting bigger, is related to their later math skills. And this is particularly as students get older, like students in grade 2 and grade 3 is where the order skills really come in. And proportionally, from the standpoint of number lines, placing numbers on a number line. Number lines are just the greatest because they capture so much math information in them. So say a child is asked to place 420 on a number line from 0 to 1,000. The child might reason, okay, 500 is halfway, and then they have to use their proportional skills to think, okay, halfway is about here, 420 is a little less, so then they can place the number on the number line. So number lines are in the assessment. Other good thing about number lines is you can look at different number ranges. So for kindergarten, we can be looking at a number line to 10. Grade 1, 100. We can be looking at fraction number lines. So it's all the same type of assessment, but it's all capturing knowledge of different, of the number system, different ranges of the number system. And again, meta-analysis, 41 studies, yep, number line, hugely predictive of later math skills, really robust. Number operations, we're looking at fact fluency. So we're talking simple math facts, single digit addition, single digit subtraction. And I'm sure I'm sure you're all buying into this when you see, yeah, 250 studies, math fluency uniquely predictive of students' math performance. Kids really need to have those math facts at their fingertips so they can solve problems easily and so that they can do more complex thinking and they can be creative in looking at how they can combine numbers. Year 1, we got a bit of pushback about the fact that we were doing fact fluency, and the teachers were saying, well, we really want to know about their conceptual understanding of math facts. So we added an assessment called equations, where we're tapping into students' understanding of things like the identity principle, commutative properties. And why? Because again, equivalence is the building block for understanding algebra, which is a gatekeeper for high school math. So really important to tap into that. So that's pretty much what we ended up with our test battery. Year 1, we put it out there and we found that, yep, this is just a summary for grade 2. Those subtasks, number line performance, number order, number comparison, and number writing, all you were uniquely predictive of kids' whole number arithmetic. Longitudinally, from year 1, the fall of 2021 to last fall, we found that all those tasks, the whole task battery for kids in grade 2 was predictive of their scores on the EMA task, which is early math assessment, I should have said that at school, are predictive of their early math scores in the fall. So we've got the construct validity in the fact that these are all research-based, but we're also seeing it in the numbers. So this is kind of what the booklets look like. But essentially, what I want to stress here is that this now goes up to grade 4. It is a research-based assessment. And going back to those goals, what are the goals of screening? Well, they're a window into gauging the overall skill level of students. They're a window into allowing you to identify students who might need some extra support. And they can be used to monitor student progress, which Tracy is going to talk about how she's done that, so that you can actually track, are the students learning what I think they're learning? Are they growing at the rate we should see them growing? And just a couple quick examples. So, actually, first I'll say this. So the way we're looking at all these different things, is it a good gauge? Can it be used to track performance? Are through some of our partner projects, which Joanne's going to talk more deeply about, but we have a lot of research projects going with a lot of different school divisions who are using the early math assessment tool for a variety of different purposes, but primarily to track student progress and to see who needs extra help so they can intervene. But for the idea of gauging skills, I mentioned that we had this research project with Fort Vermilion. After the first assessment, we got some feedback from Fort Vermilion School District, which is northern Alberta. And they said, wow, our kids have no idea what number lines are about. And they were kind of shocked because, their math leads thought, well, I think teachers are using number lines in their teaching, but it was a bit of a wake-up call that there aren't a lot of number lines being used out there. So the math leads went out and started talking number lines and started helping the teachers learn about number lines and using number lines in the classroom. So that's just an example of how it was really effective for them to help move their learning forward from a classroom standpoint, as opposed to just strictly individual. And the other thing, can you identify students who are struggling? Well, this is just a simple graph. We've got number of students along the y-axis, and we've got their total score on the early math assessment on the x-axis. And you can see we've got a nice little bell curve, basically to show you that these tasks do differentiate skills. The range of scores are normally distributed, not only on the full score, but also on each of the individual subsets. So teachers are looking at those scores as well. So it does work well for picking out children who are in the lower range of school so that you can add some support. So now I'm actually going to pass it over to Tracy, because she's going to talk a little bit about how she's using the assessment tool to help monitor student progress and some of the exciting work that she has developed since she started with it. You're welcome. Yeah, as I go falling down the stairs. I would be very prone to that.
Again, hello? We're good? Okay. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. It's a highlight of my career, for sure. So I feel so blessed. As Heather had alluded to, I'm an educator in Grande, Prairie, Alberta. We get a phone call from my deputy superintendent to say, hey, the government just called us. We have this tool that we have to use, and you need to do it next week. And I'm like, whoa. So we embarked in our small little division using the EMA tool. And what was interesting about the layout of the tool, first off, I was like, finally, we have something that we can start to measure early mathematics and then take that information to our classroom and our teachers. But I needed to devise a system that was going to work for not only our teachers, but also from the funding level of what we were getting from Alberta, education. So big picture, where that arrow is, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit today about the area of what does Grande Prairie Public early numeracy intervention look like for us. So once this announcement came through the pipeline, the deputy superintendent, myself, and my director, we sat down and we had to have an information meeting about, here's our set amount of money, and yet we need to get into 15 of our schools. And the money that was allotted to us wasn't going to afford us the ability to hire a math lead at every school, as in a math lead educator. So what we ended up coming up with was that we were going to hire 2 lead instructional intervention teachers that would oversee this project. And then we took to social media to hire 20 educational assistants. So the reason I preface this is that the intervention lessons that came with the EMA were designed for teachers to do the intervention with of what they were seeing with their children in the data. Now, we were going to hire parents, in essence, to do this work, which in theory doesn't really make sense. to me initially. So I thought, well, I actually in truth have teachers that probably wouldn't have known how to do the intervention lessons as well. So I thought I better devise a system where it can be scripted per subtest that Heather just clearly went through with you. And then that way, when we have an educational assistant delivering the intervention with our students, we would have at least knowledge from, at least in my position, helicoptering in that there is some good direction and it's tied to the EMA. The grassroots approach then for us is that it's ever evolving. So I have these scripted lessons per subtest, per grade, but also know that that is not set in stone. So we want these lessons that are being delivered to be responsive to our students. So the initial screener in Grande Prairie Public is delivered to all of our students from grade 1 to grade 4. The data at Grande Prairie Public, we then capture in a spreadsheet for our own doing, but we also capture the data to do it, to give it to our Alberta education platform so that they can then bring that data back to Carleton for norming purposes. So there's a twofold there. That data, once it goes to the Alberta government platform, we actually don't see it. So we had to capture it for in-house. So we do that through an Excel spreadsheet. And in our Excel spreadsheet, we have the data captured per class, per subtest, per grade, per school, per child. So it's pretty explicit that we can do a little, experiment to say, whoo, generally in the division, number computation is not working so well for us. But then we can also hone in on specific schools, classrooms, and students with that data. We don't leave out the first graders. So we do the screener with our grade 1 students, but we will wait till they have had some experience being in school. I'm not sure about here, but in Alberta, in our, well, the whole province, obviously, the kindergarten is not mandatory. So we will have students in grade 1 that is their first time being in that formal institution. So then to go, here's a screener on day 2, when half of them don't even know how to hold a pencil, is going to be tough. So we allow some teaching to happen before that screener is delivered. So we want to put some faces to the data now. So this is just a sample of a grade 4 class. And down the, well, on your side, down the left-hand column, it just identifies what each subtest is that we measure. And then we highlight the Excel sheet in either green or red. This one in particular, we just did red. The red shows us where the individual student is in accordance to the weighted totals and then the norms that have been put back to us through Carleton's work. It is that red that you see there, that's our decision making at each school site to decide what of who and what of these students that they're going to get the intervention on. Now, you'll see that those 2 blue arrows, the one that's pointing at the 64, that particular child still received intervention, even though if their weighted total showed that they were above the cut score or the norm. But the reason why is we took a look at what they were low in, and it was just too important for future maths for them and their understanding to just let it go. So students of that nature, even though their weighted total score may have been at or above where we were hoping the students to be, still would be available spots to have the intervention. The weighted totals then we take a very serious look at in where we place our students. So now said child here 0, that's just because they missed, like they weren't there that day that the assessment was given. It's not that they don't know anything. So, but anyhow, so that's kind of what we do for our own personal data. That helps us direct what students receive intervention and what students may receive intervention, but would be in classroom. So what then comes is that the intervention we run is on a 6-week cycle. So we will initially look at our bubble students. So they'll be the ones that are just below that cut score to be green on the weighted total column. And the reason that we start there is that we want students to have the confidence and success right away. So we start our intervention for grades 2 to 4, second week of school. And we want them to close some gaps early and get that confidence that they can handle, grade 2 or grade 3 moving forward. Once they're discharged, then we'll take a look at the students that need a bit more intervention. Now, we'll still run a 6-week cycle, but we're constantly reassessing to see where each student that receives intervention is at in accordance to each of the subtests. The other thing that I really want to point out is that we have educational assistants hired to do the delivery of the lessons, but they don't make any stakeholder decisions. So they just kind of deliver the information. It is the school principal, the school leadership team, the classroom teacher, and our 2 leads and myself that will make decisions about where students are in movement within the intervention. As well, when I have there the equity, some of our schools will have a lower population, but it would be higher needs. So in those particular schools, we may have 2 educational assistants because we have higher needs with that population than we would at a school that maybe houses 800 or 900 students. So that is really taken into consideration as well. And that first Excel sheet really determines for us where our educational assistants will be placed. So the intervention in itself is a pull-out delivery. So once the decision is made that these set students will get intervention, they're pulled out of their classroom 20 to 30 minutes a day, depending on the school and what their time frame is for the course of their day. Some have other initiatives that we have to take into account. Now, all of our schools are either a K to 6 or K to 8 in Grande Prairie Public. Our high schools are 9+. I'm not sure if that's the dynamic here, but we have 15 schools at that level. As already said, there's multiple check-in points, and we try and do as short term as possible. We did see that 6 weeks was a pretty good cycle, but we may have to repeat a 6-week cycle with some students. Now, once we've done that and we've done multiple check-in points, this is where that responsiveness becomes part of the classroom teacher and the other stakeholders to really support that child. Because if we're not seeing growth in a certain area, then we all come back to the table and go, okay, so what is it that this said student is doing? We take a look at what their work is. We take a look at what their test scores are. We take a look at the EMA and what they physically wrote. We look for their behaviors in the classroom. And from that point, then we decide some decisions about how we can then support that child further. So it becomes very, very individual when it gets to this point. If after all of that, we still have a student that is not showing growth in the subtest areas, we then use the EMA to then further have further evidence for them to have some sort of educational testing done. So there might be a learning deficit of some spot there that educational testing would help us to then narrow down again what is good programming for that said child. So it starts broad and we narrow it down. By the time we get to that bottom bullet, per school, we might have, depending on the area, 2 to 5 students. The intervention is broken down into very scripted mini lessons, and based on the subtest from the EMA, the lessons, and I'll show you a quick slide of those, before the educational assistants are off to their schools to do their wonderful work, they come to see me at central office, and I run them through a full day training session. All of our work for our students are captured on what I was really creative with this, a Mathemat. And it literally is a big piece of paper that looks like a mat. and we just capture all of their data on one mat. It makes it easier for me to then take a look at some evidence of students, and I'm not flipping through papers. So that was the idea for me. It was really about me. So, and the mats are organized from numbers 1 to 10, and then, as you can see, 1 to 20 and 1 to 100. So students, after they've gone through all the training, then they have to complete these mats independently. And they have to complete 3 of them independently. Once we look at what they've done on these independent mats, if we feel like, whew, I think it's time to do a check-in. So then we have a different mat, the assessment mat, and then we reassess on that mat where students are. And we do that comparison of what their work was leading up to, where we have gotten them to in that, could it be 3 to 6 weeks at that point. It is at that point on the assessment mat that we then make decisions about where are the next steps for the students. So if a child has done very well in the number 1 to 10 and just needed a boost, but is in grade 3, then we don't dismiss them from intervention. We then roll them to the 1 to 20 mat. And then if they have success there, we roll them in another 6-week cycle to the 1 to 100 mat. So it is ever evolving. And again, the child is the driving force in where they're at. And so I feel like we can make a difference for each children depending where they're at and what they're showing. All student data from the assessment mat gets tracked in a different Excel sheet. And then that is shared out to our board members, to our all of our ed exec members, myself included, so that everyone's kind of in the know of what their monies are being spent on and what progress that we're making. Here's the mini lessons very quickly. The first 5 days of intervention, students are given very explicit scaffolded delivery of lessons in that 20 to 30 minutes every day. Days 7, there are guided lessons. So we're starting to do that gradual release where students are getting a little bit more independent. And by day 12, we want them fully independent in that particular Mathemat of 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 or 1 to 100. The reevaluation then comes after they've completed 3 independent Mathemats. That's an example of a Mathemat. So this is our 1 to 10 Mathemat. Middle there, and then each of these components are just subtests from the EMA. We use Reconrex in the intervention for our computation pieces, and the lens on that was that students have seen dot collections and dot collections and dot collections, but something's not quite sticking. So we wanted to find a different tool that we could use so that, and we could slide, an amount over instead of having an individual count. And we've found that the Reconrex have been hugely successful with our students to the point now where, yay, teachers are coming to me saying, how do I get training on Reconrex? Where do I get them? How do I use them? Because our intervention students are coming back to the classroom and saying, hey, excuse me, I need my Reconrec. And they're like, what? So students are starting to have their own voice about what their needs are in their classroom, separate of the intervention time. So it's lovely to see. So this is an example of a grade 2 tracking sheet. You can see at the side there, I have student 1, student 1, student 1. So they've done 3 independent mats. We do an assessment mat. We still have a bit of work to do. We do some work. We do 3 more independent mats. We do another assessment mat. They were getting better, not quite ready to be discharged or moved to a different numbered mat. So all of those students along the side there will be assessed 2 to 3 times before any movement is made with that child who's in intervention. Now, I will say that, say, student 1, maybe after their first assessment mat, compare and order number, they have seemingly have a handle on that. So their intervention time then, we're not going to waste their time on that. We'll do some quick check-ins, but if we notice that number line work is still very weak, then the intervention becomes very specific to what that child is showing on these assessment mats. Okay, so here is a grade 2 example. All the children, so again, on your left first column, all of the red were children that on the initial screener of the EMA showed that they were in need of further supports. After all of the intervention, we will use the EMA as their exit out of intervention. And at the side here is the retake. So this was January 16th for this group of students. And you can see that not one of them right now is in the red. So from this, anecdotally, our intention, the way that we designed the lessons, the responsiveness to students, using the research from Carleton as our platform has really made an impact in the gains that our children are getting. I do want to caution you though, is that even though we're seeing huge gains, I don't want you thinking that we're just going to throw the child back into grade 2 and we think that they're at grade level compared to our curriculum. So there's still work to be done, but they have now some skills and strategies to help foster their own learning. And they are starting to learn to have a voice for themselves as to advocate for their own needs. This is just another example, a grade 4 example. So again, the left side are the red were who received intervention. And then after several rounds of intervention cycles for some, we were able to get them into the normed area, so the green, at the end of that time. Now, not every child got there at the same rate, but that was discussed earlier as well, that they are going to grow at their own pace, but we have to be very mindful of what they are doing to know what we need to do next with that child. The lessons we learned. So we are now just started year 3 with this. So our lessons were that the computations and the number sense, the inverse, the making 10, definitely some number line work, needed far more intentional time than compare or order number. The extension lessons were created to infuse into daily practice. We are really very mindful as this was progressing to be responsive to student needs. And in doing so, I may have a child or a set of children that needed a little small piece. So instead of bringing everybody down to do an intervention, with the EAs to then know what to do, my 2 lead teachers and I make short videos. And then those go to the teachers to say, if you have a child demonstrating this or showing this, here is a quick 3-minute video on what you can do to be responsive for that student in your intervention. So it just saved, well, really again, it's about me. So it saved my time in having to helicopter into 15 schools. Our year 2 focus, and it has bled into this year as well, is to really try and hone in on the triangulation. So I have myself and our lead teachers, we have what's happening at the school site in intervention, but it's then what do we do to make sure that that data and information that we're gleaning from our students is now getting to the classroom level, and what the teachers can be doing to facilitate further what we are doing in the interventions. So we're really embarking on that heavily this year. And I'm very blessed in the division I work for that it's very supportive of that work in that triangulation. Questions? Thank you. Like literally, thank you.